My name is Patrick, and maybe are my slides up? Oops. Yes, perhaps, yeah. All right, quickly. So I work for an African nonprofit technology company called Ushahidi, which means witness in Swahili. And what we do is we build free and open source platforms for what I call live, collaborative, multimedia mapping. And what I want to do for the next 10 minutes or so is to share with you the latest developments in the field of crisis mapping for disaster response. So the application of these WEAR 2.0 technologies within the field of humanitarian response, human rights, and so on. So as we know, Japan, devastating earthquake, resulting tsunamis, really quite a lot of destruction that we saw and loss of lives. Within a few hours of the earthquake, some friends of ours with OpenStreetMap in Tokyo launched an Ushahidi map, launched a live map of Japan to basically start mapping the needs and the impact of the disaster in as near real time as possible. And they were primarily monitoring Twitter feeds across Japan and mapping those as quickly as they could, the ones that were the most relevant. And just like we saw in Haiti last year, for some of those of you who knew about the crisis mapping Ushahidi Haiti project, it was not an official, professional disaster response agency that reacted and that basically created the most comprehensive, up-to-date map available of Japan. It was a group of volunteers, just everyday type people who wanted to make a difference. And in fact, one of their, I think the youngest volunteer I heard is 13 years old, and he's a super coder, and he's just helping out in any way he can. And Seki-san, who is behind this project, is actually here at WEAR 2.0. So if you want to learn more about that, maybe we can connect a little bit later. You can see just how densely populated this map is. In Haiti, we'd mapped about 3,000 reports in total in near real time over a 2-month period. Our Japanese colleagues have been mapping 3,000 reports every week. So it's an incredibly live, comprehensive map. It's being used by the Japanese government. ESRI has been partnering, so I think Jack is going to be speaking soon this morning. And also partnering with Google and other organizations. And I know that some colleagues of mine who work for some of the Western embassies in Tokyo have also been using this to inform their situational awareness, to provide really live updates as to where things are happening in real time. We've seen a very different type of crisis unfold, unfortunately, over this past couple of months in Libya. This is no longer a natural disaster, clearly mass atrocities. Gaddafi is feeling threatened and he's clamping down. What's really interesting is that for the first time, the UN is starting to embrace the use of social media for humanitarian response. Last year, after Haiti, they were a little uncomfortable, a little nervous. But this has changed radically within the past year, to the extent that on March 1st, the head of the Information Management Unit with the UN's humanitarian response organization called OCHA, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Response, he emailed us and basically said, listen, we don't really know what's happening in Libya. The United Nations has not been based in Libya for many years now. We have no access to independent sources of information coming from Libya, and it's basically a black box for us, but we need to start taking decisions like last week about how we're going to coordinate our humanitarian relief operations. And this has to happen now. So they asked us to create a live map based on social media content that could then inform their humanitarian operations. And we did. Within a couple hours, we launched the project. And the executive director, José Chirin, of the World Food Program. The World Food Program now is the largest field-based UN agency in the world, even went so far as saying, yes, we can absolutely use this to coordinate food relief supplies along the Egyptian and Tunisian corridors. This is very different. This has not happened in the field of humanitarian response or in the history of humanitarian response, that a formal humanitarian organization is going to ask for not only a live map, but a live map of social media content. Because as we know in Libya, we've got tweets coming out, Flickr, YouTube, and so on. But social media content that's crowdsourced. They wouldn't touch the thing this time last year. They were really quite nervous about it. It's completely changed the game now. And you can see how densely populated the map starts. This was within a couple of weeks of the project starting off. Now, when I say the UN emailed us to create this live map to inform their humanitarian operations, who do I mean by us? I mean this group, the Standby Volunteer Task Force. This is a group that some friends of mine and I launched a few months ago when we saw the amazing role that volunteers were playing in this space. In Haiti, in Chile, in Pakistan, in Russia, these volunteers would just pop out of nowhere or start recruiting others and helping to map a disaster or a crisis. So we decided there's something special here that we can really try and formalize a bit and maybe create a brand of sorts out of this. So the Standby Volunteer Task Force has over 500 volunteers from more than 50 different countries around the world. They are fully trained and skilled in carrying out live crisis mapping operations for different disasters, crises, different organizations. And the word volunteer often has a connotation of volunteer, sort of amateurish, sloppy skateboarder dude kind of thing. But this is a self-selected group. And the vast majority of these individuals who are volunteering are professionals. They've got skills in another area, but they're interested in helping out and learning a new skill set. So we've got one volunteer who's been leading search and rescue operations for the past 16 years around the world. Another volunteer is an emergency airside manager at Heathrow International Airport. And what he does after the last planes take off from Heathrow Airport around midnight, he jumps on Skype with us and starts crisis mapping to help the UN's relief operations in Libya. And the profiles really vary quite a bit. It's an amazing group of people who are acquiring these skills. So I bet you're wondering, you know, can I join? Absolutely. I think that today's Jedis are very much crisis mappers, or mapsters as we call ourselves. And so we definitely invite you to drop us an email at join@standbytaskforce.com. There are no obligation to volunteer. In fact, many humanitarian and development organizations are joining the task force just to get training. So our two core missions with this volunteer network is to provide training and then to provide an interface for those who want to help and get involved in civic engagement around crises and help humanitarian local organizations have better situational awareness so that they can do their work a lot better. So what's next? I don't think we can talk about Where 2.0 at this conference without at least referencing what's happened in the Arab world, in North Africa, and the Middle East over the past few months, the revolutions and so on. We saw millions of people join protests in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Sudan, and we see Bahrain, Syria, Yemen, and so on. And one Egyptian activist was quoted as saying that we use Facebook to schedule our protests, Twitter to coordinate, and YouTube to tell the world. So we've seen this reflex over and over when some developments take place around the world. People jump on social media space and start documenting, documenting what they are seeing. Sorry. But we're also seeing another kind of reflex. We're seeing a mapping reflex. So some colleagues of ours in Cairo, an Egyptian group, set up this Ushahidi map during the protest. And if your eyes are better than mine, the URL reads /CR for civil resistance, actually. So they were using this platform to not only identify and document human rights abuses, how the Mubarak regime and the thugs were cracking down on protesters, but also to let each other know what was happening and where. And part of the core feature of the Ushahidi platform is this subscribe to alert. So you have to take my word for this, and it's in Arabic, but you can basically put in your email address and your cell phone number and get automatic real-time updates. You use the cursor in the map there to basically say where you are, maybe a neighborhood where you live. You define the radius, area of interest, and then as soon as somebody maps an event there, you'll get that on your text message. So it gives you this kind of real-time situational awareness that allows people to make more informed decisions, hopefully. What's really interesting, talking about the impact of social media and Where 2.0 technologies in Egypt and beyond, was this document, a 26-page paper, printed document that was circulated in Cairo and Alexandria that is very, very smart, very good advice and guidance, tactics and strategies on how to carry out civil resistance in Egypt. And it's since been shared with people in the Sudan and elsewhere. What's really interesting for our purposes about this document is how much focus it has on space and on movement, right? You start recruiting people in the small alleyways, that builds more momentum. more sense of trust and so on, and then you flood into the big avenues with everybody else. You don't just start all of a sudden in Tahrir Square. The civil resistance in Egypt was one of the most disciplined, well-executed, planned civil resistance movements in many, many years. And the document also includes screenshots of downtown Cairo from Google Earth about certain areas, where to move in which direction, which is pretty phenomenal. But now they're screenshots, they're static, they're PDFs. We don't have to constrain ourselves to PDFs anymore with these live maps, right? And what's really interesting is a US security chief was ranting a couple months ago about all these technologies, because he's basically saying these real-time maps are basically as good as having your own helicopter. And he's really upset about this because he's just waiting until people in the US and protesters in the US get their hands on this and start coordinating protests with this. And he says maybe these real-time maps are in fact better than having your own helicopter, because you can distract the crew. And by that, what he means is, imagine if you had the Egyptian protesters in January using a live map and pretending to go in the direction of the parliament, right? But in fact, they're legging it the other way towards the presidential palace or what have you. So you can start doing deception and tactics and so on. So we figured that's pretty cool. How do we as Ushahidi, with our focus on social impact and beyond, help this out? Not only for activists, but also disaster response. How do we provide these people with the best helicopter possible, right? Which we all know is Airwolf. So we don't have to look very far, all right? We just had Dennis present. The idea of check-ins is very much like instant mapping. It's this kind of like almost single-click mapping, which could be very, very interesting and valuable to activists and disaster response officials. So what we did at South by Southwest just last month is launch our first version of the Ushahidi check-in system, which we're referring to as CI for check-ins, so Ushahidi CI. It's very much at the beginning stages, but the idea is to learn from others and see how we can customize this functionality for a social type purpose. So like everything else with Ushahidi, it's free and it's open source. You develop your own check-ins. The next version of this will include badges, right? And points, and that's important because why not become the mayor of a sit-in or a boycott? And instead of this idea of, in case of emergency, break glass, why not, in case of emergency, check in? So we're working with the UN to figure out how this can be piloted with their teams and also with some activists. So I quickly created last night a check-in system for Where 2.0, actually. So this is sort of quickly what it looks like. It's straightforward, right? Nothing crazy. But if you wanted to try this out, and if, in fact, the first three people who check in with their email addresses can get a Ushahidi t-shirt for free. So you can download your smartphone apps right there, download.ushahidi.com, and then point your app to where2011.crowdmap.com. And I just tweeted this on Patrick Meier. So if you go on Twitter, you'll see those links there already. Crowdmap, you might have noticed I haven't spoken about that yet. Crowdmap is simply the Ushahidi platform, but in the cloud. It's like the Google Docs, the hosted version of the Ushahidi platform, which allows you to really start mapping very, very quickly. So that's basically it. Our next step as well for the check-ins is to do what our friends of ours did in London during the protests against students. They basically set up their own check-in system, but the cool thing here is that they've got a danger compass. And basically, the red is where the cops are, and the green is where the cops are not. And you want to leg that way. And so it's a very intuitive way to see where things are and where you are relative to potential danger spots. So we're going to be integrating that as well in the check-in service. So that's basically it for me. I'll be around during lunch. If you want to talk about how you can maybe apply your own technologies in the field, to the field of humanitarian response, crisis mapping, human rights, and so on, I'd love to chat and love to see what you guys are doing. One of the things I've been doing over the past 5 years, being a non-techie, coming from the humanitarian side, is trying to bridge the gap between the technology community, the state of the art, the cutting edge, basically you all, and the humanitarian community. So I'd love to get your ideas and possibly collaborate. Thank you very much.